Thank you for coming to check out another episode of the Stash Cast, where we have interesting conversations with interesting people. The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict which transactions were going to occur before anybody else? You can with Needle. Check it out at needle, nedl.us to learn more. All right, today I'm very excited for this. I have one of my favorite people in the business, in the industry, Mr. TJ Ackermann. He has a long resume here. He's the president and CEO of TJ Ackermann Company, managing member of the East End Development, which is a tremendous development, managing partner of Hearth Home Communities, and you've done many other things. I'm just looking at your LinkedIn right now. TJ, thank you so much for coming to join me today.
Stash, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. I've just touched on everything, but as I was thinking about this interview and in preparation, I think one of my favorite stories that you've told me is how real estate development really runs like in your blood. Like you told me that your grandfather built a bunch of those fourplexes on Tennessee, and that's kind of Tennessee Avenue here in the Cincinnati market. And that's really how, I guess, the family got started. So maybe, can you take us all the way back and then bring us forward?
Sure. Nice family history where my grandfather was a real estate developer, but on a very small scale, and was actually very vertically integrated in terms of his businesses. Rudy Ackermann started building duplexes and fourplexes as well as single family homes back in the early years of the 19 teens. So 1916, 1917 is when he really started. And he started developing in the Norwood and Bond Hill neighborhoods. And that is where he lived with his family. He grew up in Norwood and was active in that community. And Rudy was able to also combine his real estate building and development business with a real estate brokerage and a real estate insurance agency. Okay. So Rudy could build you a home, sell you a home, and he could insure that home. So he had multiple silos of opportunities for income, which was really, I think, inspirational and really wise. And that has made us always very aware of development's great, building is very good, but also operating a business is very healthy in terms of being able to control and manage your cash flows. So my father and his brother learned from him, and my brother and I have learned from our father and our mother, who operated their businesses for decades. So we've got a nice history, a great background, and we're constantly learning and trying to improve.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you've done that's amazing. Yeah, he truly was vertically integrated before it became a buzzword of today. But so I guess fast forward, how did you get started in the business? You grew up in, I remember, I think your brother told me that he was swinging hammers and cleaning up job sites as a kid. Did you follow a similar path?
Oh, we were side by side. That's mom and dad had us involved early on. For everyone, early on is different, but they got us involved with the business as working over the summers, as well as discussing it actively around the dinner table every night. So we were very aware of the market, different conditions, and business issues throughout our young lives. And so when we hear stories about interest rates being at 18% and dealing with very difficult things in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, those are all very relevant and top of mind for us because we heard that discussed and we lived that. We weren't actively involved, but we became knowledgeable through the discussions around the dinner table. So I can remember those issues in the early 1980s with those high interest rates and the challenges and things that mom and dad did, selling properties themselves, using 5-year ARMs, partnering with savings and loans, which were the banks of choice at that time. So that then really led into probably something that was more formative and important for our discussion is during college, mom and dad set aside some building lots and had my brother and myself build homes during the summer. And it was a very well orchestrated, but very subtly done operation. At the Christmas holiday break, we would come home and we would select a building plan of a home we were going to build from a plan book, a preset architectural plan. Spring break was spent lining up subcontractors and finalizing bids for what we were going to build that summer. And the summer came and we were the on-site labor crew for general labor and for framing. Now, we had our dad overseeing us. We had a lead carpenter that was guiding us. He was our cut man, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we're the labor crew. And from there, we would have to help organize and oversee different subcontractors, albeit on one house on a small scale, but with people that were known entities. And by the end of the summer, we were transitioning into having to sell that home, making marketing material, all hard paper and copy prior to the internet, and visit local real estate offices and promote our house for sale. And the sale of that house went to pay for our college education that next year. So there was a big motivation to sell that thing. One home, one summer turned into two homes the next summer. And that's what really got us launched into understanding the development and building business, albeit on a very small scale, but one that's understandable.
Huh, that's amazing. That's genius, actually, because it gives you that. I'm going through that. So I grew up working for my dad. He was a contractor, and so I did similar labor throughout my, I guess, childhood and teenage years, going to the lumber yard to pick up stuff in the morning, and then you go to the job. You want to make sure you're minimizing road time because that's just burning daylight hours. And then, so similar thing, but now I'm going through what you've just described with my own 6 unit, and I'm GCing the whole thing, and that's it's a learning experience to say the least. So,
But those are great because those are scalable, and that's what
yeah,
I appreciate from my parents, such as you can't jump in and just build a 200-unit apartment complex
no,
and think that you've got this figured out, and that you come from a background that knows how to do this, but you don't know how to do it. So start small, work your way up, and go in a tiered, systematic, planned approach, and things will work out well.
Mhm. And it seems like you've done that with some of your other developments. I think the one that you probably are, I would say, most famous for is the East End development. What was that called? It was an old rail yard.
Walworth Junction.
Walworth Junction. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Good. You got the right name of the development company, which most people never know.
Right. How did you spy that site? And then, because was it a functioning rail yard when you approached it, or had it been fallow?
That one had been decommissioned
Okay.
and was simply vacant land, but it was a brownfield. So it was polluted or contaminated by the prior operation, albeit manageable and something that could be remediated, but something that needed a creative approach. And so that was where the idea of a high-end single-family home development with a home show component and in partnership with the city of Cincinnati, all those combined made it something that was viable and relevant to do.
Yeah, that's a lot of stakeholders to wrangle, you might say. Like, how did you manage to do that? And how long did a project like that take?
So that took about 3 years of planning and 1 year of execution.
Okay.
But that came very in a seasoned part of my career. So where
Right.
you
I've jumped from building one or two houses to now you're doing this very complex development.
So there were many developments before that were very both simple in terms of scale and not as complex, that only involved private money, to a progression of getting involvement from the public sector, from grants, working our way into public bonds that provided infrastructure money, and including different components of tax abatements. So there's a whole progression of complexities that we've learned over the course of developing for now, albeit 30 years.
So then could you, I've jumped, but could you give us kind of an idea? Like what was the progression? Were you just churning out houses and then said, oh, I can build some apartments or something like that?
Very much so, yes. Going from single family home building to small subdivision development of first 7 homes and then adding to that maybe 20 homes was a nice progression to opportunities to look for infill development in partnership with the city that really grew out of the Home Builders Association partnership with the city of Cincinnati at the urging of the mayor at the time, Roxanne Qualls, for infill development. So that was 1996, well before the revitalization of these urban areas was in vogue and really even viable, to where it was subsidized and it was high risk, low return, but it developed a core base. And so we leveraged that to do more infill developments. And from those, we learned about public finance, to where we looked for apartment project opportunities in infill locations. And that led us to potentially one of our bigger projects was the development at Rookwood. That was the Cornerstone project. And that involved public finance involving the city of Norwood. And we initially looked at a multifamily development there, but through relationships and strategic partnerships with the Al Company, we brought them in and they were able to educate and explain to us the higher and best use of what became an office development.
Yeah.
So by basically start small, build incrementally, and then surround yourself with good people in terms of partnerships and trusted advisors that can help you look at things through different lenses and different opportunities to identify highest and best use, and then the opportunities to partner with them. And so that's really how that evolved, and then grow from there.
Yeah. I didn't know that you had built that. So I learned something new already. Wow, that's amazing. Interesting.
So that was an interesting project because that really was our entry into really a public-private partnership where we were initiating public bonds to build public infrastructure. And on that development, it was the parking garage that created the value on office buildings that created a taxable base on the earnings of that property that was an incentive for the city of Norwood.
Okay.
And to experience that, learn about it, and be able to implement it and get introduced to the experts in that field on the bond financing and public sector finance through local legal groups, that allowed us to look at other more creative opportunities and partner with other municipalities, other cities in the region, and use that same tool for other types of development. But we got the knowledge base from doing one and could leverage in that to other development types. And so that's really I think a good introduction and explanation of how we got to where we are today.
Yeah. So was the garage built through a TIF bond?
Yes.
Okay. And that was repaid. So you got the TIF bond issuance, you sold it to an investor, and then that gave you some of the equity capital that you needed. And then the servicing of that bond is through essentially the tax payments for, I would assume, like a 30-year amortization, something like that.
Correct.
Was that a developer-backed bond or a municipal-backed bond?
I believe that was a developer-backed bond.
Okay.
And there's, of course, different ones for different opportunities. It depends on what the city is looking for. How invested are they? What's their interest level?
Yeah.
Kinds of opportunities and options there with all those.
Yeah, I feel like that was probably at the front end, and I've only been here in Cincinnati since 2011, so I might be talking uneducatedly, but maybe that was at the front end of Norwood's kind of redevelopment that we're seeing with Factory 52 and then the Paycor building and all that.
Really, the Jeffrey R. Anderson Company was at the forefront, and their development of Rookwood was the lead and the instigator for our development. And what we looked at was their success, and we leveraged off of that. So back to a simple adage, there nothing is really that new, and you're really just trying to replicate or copy some of the best examples. So we looked at what Jeff Anderson and his team did, and we used that as an example for what we wanted to do. And we basically copied it. We modified it and tried to make it better. And it was very competitive because they were held up on their phase 2 section of their development, and we were able to come to market sooner, capture market share with the belief that the market was deep enough, there was enough opportunities and businesses that wanted to be there of all types, that their second phase could still be viable, but we needed to be in between phases 1 and 2, which we were able to do. And so I think we all benefited in the end, albeit they were held up, and it was a difficult situation we know that they encountered, not anything we had anything to do with, but we looked at its ability to take advantage of it.
Wasn't there one house that was a holdout for many years? That was the issue. Yeah.
That was a big thorn in their side, and we did not agree with what was being done, but it gave us an opportunity to further our development, get it complete, and then it increased value for their development in the long run. So
yeah, it's what you mentioned. I heard a story once that CVS's real estate department was Walgreens. They would let Walgreens do all the site selection, and then, okay, they're going on that corner, we'll go on the one right across the street.
In complement to that, our Hearth home communities that we developed starting in 2014. The model that I replicated there was from Redwood Living, had a very unique product. And so we looked at that as something to model after for a product type. And then for location, we simply followed the Kroger plan. We looked at where Kroger grocery stores were either existing or going, and then we wanted to be in close proximity to them because their real estate department is exceptional. They know how to study the demographics and know where growth is going to occur. So following Kroger's was part of our success.
That makes a ton of sense. I've got a theory that if you follow Chick-fil-A, I feel like if you could do a similar thing with Chick-fil-A, because they have the same, I would imagine they have the same analytics, because you never see a Chick-fil-A that is not packed at any time of the day. I would imagine that if you do something within a mile or two, you'll succeed in that.
I think that's a great observation, a great point. I would agree.
I'm familiar with multifamily, obviously, and multifamily, you look at area rents and say, okay, here's where they are today, and then you trend them forward to say, okay, here's where I think lease up will be. But I'm curious, back to Cornerstone. So you've got the concept of a development. You've got maybe at a certain point you have buy-in from the city. Was it built on spec, or did you then say, okay, we've got this development, let's go find some tenants for it and sign up the leases, and then that's what the lenders lend on?
That one, I think for correct description, if I have this correct in the lingo, it was built on spec, but we did have tenants secured. And so for our financing, the lender required that a certain portion was pre-leased. And based on the success of the original Rookwood Tower, we were able to promote off of that and attract a medical use to come in and provide the impetus for other leasing beyond that. So though it was speculative, it was a portion of it was pre-leased to meet the lender requirements.
Yeah, I guess when I'm thinking spec, it's like you build a house or an industrial building without any tenant lined up, and then it's up and built, and then you go and find the user or occupier.
And those buildings are 125,000 square feet each. So we do not have the ability to finance that much square foot
That would be
of
pretty aggressive.
office space. But in terms of an apartment project where you're building incremental buildings, in terms of a housing development where you're doing a small number of units, that's more realistic, as well as the beauty of both apartments and single family. You've got the ability to gauge market interest and to modify as you go. An office building, you're committing to a large number of square feet that is very fixed in place in terms of the floor plate size,
Mhm.
and what you're offering inside that building. Now you can, of course, cut and slice and dice the space up however you want, but you're fixed within those walls and you're fixed with your ceiling heights as well.
Yeah.
So back to one of the advantages of the multifamily or the single family is you can more quickly adapt and react to market trends and desires and price point throughout your project.
Yeah, once you're baked with an office building, you're baked. You can't really put we're just going to put an addition on it. It doesn't really work that way. You've
No.
seen some groups do that, like TQL is doing that, but they've just expanded horizontally. And RL Carriers did that too. But they just built a replica building right next door and connected them with a breezeway or something.
Yep.
Interesting. So you've done obviously single family homes. You've done paper development with lots and things like that. That's a game, I guess, I get in theory, but could you maybe expand upon what I mean by that is you take a plot of land like Walworth and you go and do all the legal chopping up of lots and then selling them off. Like, how does that work?
From a technical standpoint, it involves a lot of engineering and legal work in terms of zoning. So the role of the developer in most cases is very sung and is very low key. It's unknown. So basically, you're working in the background. You're working with attorneys and engineers and surveyors, and you're basically lobbying behind the scenes with the local municipality and the county government to work within their framework of how you can get a project adequately zoned and approved, and then essentially built quickly so that you're not carrying things for long periods of time before you can have them recorded and actually transferred.
In my experience with development, these tend to be long due diligence time frames. Like, how have you been successful in getting the landowner to buy off on, hey, I need 12 to 18 months for due diligence to go do and to go do all these things? Like, how do you navigate that?
Two pieces of experience to share. One is having a successful track record. And probably the second more viable one that really speaks to probably you and your audience is not being the first one in. Most often I find that when I'm able to secure a piece of ground, the owner has been through multiple other contracts that have not been able to deliver. And it tends to become something where they get more realistic in terms of a price, and they get more realistic in terms of the time it's going to take to get it approved. One of the things that can hurt you is to be the first in and have to set a realistic expectation, because a lot of times that's not possible on the first go around. So if
Right.
you can be probably the third or fourth one to take a shot at something that hasn't worked, you got a much higher possibility of getting a realistic purchase price and a time frame to get it approved.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've
So
seen.
there's no secret sauce, there's no magic. It's just coming in with a realistic expectation and gauging quickly whether that landowner is realistic in their expectations. And if they're not, then it's best to walk away and wait until that comes back around. And Stash, in complement to all that, we've been able to develop relationships with different types of builders, from small to large, to identify who would be the right candidate and have them pre-qualified and already interested in the project before we go through all those iterations.
Interesting. So if it's call it a single family home development, you'll say, hey, we're looking at this. We're going to go through the iterations to take it from what it is currently to what it could be for you. Are you also saying, hey, we'll deliver it with the streets and electric and water and gas even to the site, like a pad ready site? Or I guess it depends on the deal.
It depends on the deal, because we'll work with the builder or builders to come up with the right lot size and amenity package. And then we can take it all the way through entitlement process and site development, or we can just get it entitled and then hand it off. So
Okay.
not that each deal is unique and different, but each deal follows pretty much one of two paths, whether we're doing the development work or we're handing that off and letting the builder complete that on their own.
And the development work in this case would be actually moving dirt, installing utilities, things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Two things that come to mind. One, you have, I guess based on everything we talked about, you've kept your career mostly here in the greater Cincinnati region. And I think some groups are like, oh, we're in this market and that market and here and there. How have you been able to, or have you gone out of market and done other things?
No, I've actually just stayed here. I'm very happy with that. Personal choice, both from a family standpoint and an ease of business, as well as strengthening and deepening relationships to leverage them instead of trying to be very broad and shallow, be more precise and deep.
That makes sense. What are your favorite types of deals to work on? Is it the next one, or is it like, hey, I really like to do these? Because as we've talked about, you've done single family homes, you've done apartments, you've done office and commercial. Do you have a particular favorite that you like to do?
My favorite has been the multifamily. And I found that to be something that I think, probably because of experience over not only decades, but generations, easy to understand, enjoyable to work on, and have a legacy type of a build approach to it that has made it really appeal to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you mentioned at the beginning of your career, you're doing everything on paper, marketing the homes over summer break. As your career has evolved, have you implemented technologies? And I'm curious which ones you or your team use and maybe why.
Well, most things, as I'm sure your whole audience is aware, have evolved into the digital world.
Yeah.
It's great for record keeping, for tracking all the documents, but my preference is always to work off of an actual piece of paper. But I think that probably comes from having done that for so long. There's a comfort level to that. Most everything we do is on paper and then gets transferred to an electronic version. But in terms of all the other advantages you have with technology, some is good, some's not so good. Some doesn't transfer out. The great examples of the engineers calculating how much dirt they have to move on a site with all their fancy computer programs, plug all the information in and it spits out a number. I can tell you from experience, I will work with my older, more experienced dirt contractors, and I'd lay any amount of money on them to give me the correct amount of quantity to move rather than that engineer's program. And 10 out of 10 times they're right and the engineer's program isn't. It'll get you close, or it could be some big misses. But I think the old adage right there is experience counts every time.
Yeah.
And so that's really what I look for whenever I do a deal, and no matter who I'm working with, I want experience. And happy to change using experts depending on their experience level in certain areas.
Mhm.
It's not always transferable from one project to the next.
I unplugged myself. Sorry. Yeah. Interesting. It's just a lot to cover here. It's so you were also involved in you're president of the Home Builder Association. Was that a result of all the home building and single family developments that you've been involved with over your career?
Something my family's been involved with for a very long time, from my mom and dad being involved in it and serving in different roles, and my brother and I continuing that, and then just progressing up and seeing both the value of the organization and knowing that it has created so much value for our family, wanting to give back in any way possible so that it's recognized that we appreciate what's been done for us,
Mhm.
and hoping to maintain and enhance it so that going forward other people will benefit as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It sounds like the keys to success for you have been just building and maintaining meaningful, long-lasting relationships, learning from experience, and sometimes it doesn't always work out, but that's what we call a learning experience.
There's a lot of those. As long as there's fewer of those than there are the successes, you're doing okay.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. TJ, I really appreciate your time and you joining us today. If somebody is interested in reaching out to you, what would you say the best way to get in touch is?
Best way is to check me out on my LinkedIn and contact me through that. It'd be great.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Stash, thanks for having me on your show. I really enjoyed it.
You're the man,
Thank
TJ.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye.